Hi, everyone.
Hey, everybody. How you doing today?
Welcome to the Metaphysical Report. I am Sabrina.
And I'm Steve.
We're great friends. And I am a psychic coach and healer. And this channel is about metaphysical stuff. And we're focusing in the beginning of the channel on astrology and numerology. Numerology is what my forte. And
I do Vedic astrology, which is the traditional astrology from India. And so we're excited to kind of really bring metaphysics involved. We're starting with, obviously, with what we know best, but we're really open to a lot of different metaphysical avenues and approaches. And so on this channel, you're going to get to see a lot of different perspectives. So, what are we doing today? We're doing something pretty interesting. We've been wanting to do this for a while.
Yes. So today is part 1 of our COVID Part 2 series.
Right. It's we've been wanting to do this for a while. Sabrina and I, we're very simpatico in a lot of ways, and which is obviously why we've been good friends. And the whole COVID thing is, everything with it has been really just right up my alley in terms of my approach. I am in natural medicine. That's my quote unquote day job. So I've been into natural health, alternative healing for the past 25 years, since my early 20s. And in particular, when we talk about vaccines and pandemics and viruses, all these things, I've always approached it from an alternative viewpoint, right? Because that's kind of been my mindset.
Sure.
And I've been looking into these type of things from the time I was in my early 20s, understanding that there was a different narrative that's really been suppressed out there, and which was a conversation that you and I were having, that, we're really not seeing this approach, kind of what we're talking about, really out there in the metaphysical community, right? I think we were surprised by that.
Yeah.
Because we're naturally questioning by nature.
Sure.
We're naturally skeptical by nature, right?
Uh-huh.
These are the type of things that we are all about. And so when I saw, I'll just speak for me at this point, when I just saw how people were giving into a lot of fear, that I thought, completely being paralyzed by that, unquestioning the authorities and what we should be doing and all that. I was astounded, to be quite honest with you.
Right.
My understanding of these type of things from way back, understanding about flu and how, the real cause of diseases and root causes, I felt that there was just this herd mentality.
Yeah.
That people were just headlonging into all these very authoritarian proposals,
Yeah.
and then seeing how everyone kind of were like lemming-like, just kind of flipping over that cliff of just, so we're going to get into that, and, because it's really something at least I know that I didn't feel was out there. And then when we talked about it, we were like, oh yeah, that should definitely be one of our shows. It'll probably be one of our longer shows. That's why it's 2 parts. So.
Yes. So there's so much to dive into. So yeah, let's go at it.
Let's go at it. Let's go at it. Right. So we've been, this is, so, as an aside, I do wonder if it's the part that, we live in Florida, right?
Right.
So,
we do. We live in Florida.
we live in Florida. So maybe, you can take that if there's a bias or not, but also in all seriousness, I think it's a matter of putting the information out there and just allowing people to make their own decisions.
Totally.
I don't live my life with fear. It's never been my guiding light. I came out of that from when I was in my early 20s, having had certain experiences. And so I've been conditioned to if something I'm fearful about, okay, I'm going to look into it, right? I'm going to step into it. And I think there's a lesson for that for all of us as well.
Right.
So more specifically with the pandemic, as we call it, we want to set the stage for you. Okay. So, what do we have here? We really, over these next two episodes, and especially with this one, there's just a lot of things that were being set up. I mean, people actually had been predicting this pandemic in terms from the astrological configurations. I know I was listening to some astrologers easily, back 2017, maybe a little earlier, somewhere in there, that they were saying that there were some configurations coming up. I was not as much into the outer planets back then. I would say I got into the outer planets really more towards COVID. And then when I really started understanding the dynamics of that, being the Vedic traditional astrology, we don't typically use the outer planets, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, the planet of disease and pestilence, right, and restrictions, right, the lockdown, the COVID lockdowns, all of that would be ascribed under Saturn,
Sure.
right? And so, just from the Vedic perspective, traditional astrology perspective, you would look at Saturn and see what significant,
right, what's going on
with Saturn, right? Like, is it going to do some things, right?
Yeah.
And of course, there's other players in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And come to find out that Jupiter was in debilitation for all of 2020. Okay, so what does that mean? So Jupiter is a planet of optimism,
mm-hmm.
prosperity, abundance, knowledge, right? That's out in the world, truth, right? So when it's debilitated, we say dharma, right? Mm-hmm. Dharma, righteousness, is lacking in the world, right? Mm-hmm. And so our ability to connect with truth is harder, right? When Jupiter's debilitated, sure. right? So that's kind of like the cosmic weather at that point, right?
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, I have been telling my clients that 2020 was going to be quite significant because, for me, 2008 was really significant. Mm-hmm. And that's really, I would say, I started seeing clients, like around 2004.
Yeah.
And so 2008 comes around, and that was my first time to really see, in effect, working with clients and actually seeing Jupiter in debilitation, right? And so what did that bring us? That brought us the crisis of 2008.
Yeah, recession, yeah.
Right? So I think that was pretty significant. So that's kind of where I got into that. And then from 2008, Jupiter takes 12 years to go back into the sign it was previously. Wow. It's a 12-year cycle. So I knew something in 2020 was coming up.
Totally.
It was like, okay, there's something going on. Didn't predict the pandemic, none of that. But I knew there was going to be great economic turmoil. That was very clear because the planet, Jupiter, planet of prosperity, abundance, right, was debilitated. So I knew that much, and I guided my clients accordingly with that. Sure. What numbers were you seeing related to that?
Wow. Okay. So first I looked at the numerology of the letters of the big name, of course, COVID-19, COVID itself, but also the original name, which was Corona. So I looked at the numerology of that. It's all very interesting, as well as the big players and in the whole pandemic. So COVID itself, COVID, adds up and reduces to an 8. Okay. 8 is a number that's actually ruled by Saturn.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So the thing you need to know about these is that we do our own research, right? We don't really we give kind of a small, like, okay, we're going to talk about, an outline, if you will.
Yeah.
But we don't really kind of know exactly what each other's going to say. So this is the first time I'm hearing this. So that's why I'm shocked, but okay. Perfect.
Yeah. So it's an 8. So it's ruled by Saturn, and 8's all about having power. 8 is the power number, and it's about making money. And we know, we'll go into that on really what the purpose of it all was. And there was many. Okay. So then if you add the 19 to it, so COVID-19 adds up and reduces to a 9. And a 9 in numerology is all about endings, and it's all about major changes. Okay, so that obviously happened. And then looking at Corona, so Corona added up to a 3. Yeah, a 3. And interestingly enough, 3 is all about joy. It's about happiness. It's about expression. And interesting, you think of Corona, well, the Corona beer, right? And everyone's like in a good mood and right, has good energy. But just notice that quickly changed. They quickly got rid of that name, right? Because that was, again, a more happy name to put in a more scary name, right? Yes. With COVID, with the 8 and the 9. And then just looking at the other players in the pandemic, we have the WHO, and you add up the WHO and you get...
Well, tell them what that is. Tell them what the WHO is.
Oh, the World Health Organization. Yep. Okay. So you add that up and you get a 1 that's preceded by a 19. And a 19 has a lot of karma. Now, one is the leader, right? So they actually are,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
the leader of health in our world. But the 19 that precedes it has karma of abuse of power.
Ah,
Okay.
okay.
So that was interesting. And then the name Fauci, you add that up and you get a 22.
Power number. That
Yes.
much I know. It's about
Yes. 22. A 22, yes, has a ton of power. And it's about working with other people, okay? And it's about building on a large scale, okay? So we can go a little deeper into that, but there's, you know, been a lot of talks that he was, you know, he's been involved with this for a very, very long time. So it's all about building things on a really large scale. And then I also looked up Wuhan, right, where this supposedly originated, and that also adds up to a 22.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yes.
Okay.
So again, going back to working with people, trying to create something for the people and something that's building on a large scale.
So would this also be like structures and building structures? Because I get that sense that like the 4, which is kind of the number it has its energy element of, right? It's 2 plus 2, and
yeah, 4 has that Saturn energy too. Okay. 4 is a lot about hard work, discipline, having a strong foundation to grow from.
Because with Fauci, then I would see that almost as, I mean, he was in that place for like 30 some odd years. You know,
what place?
It's Director of National Institutes of Health, like
the
government position he held. He held back when the AIDS epidemic was going on. You know, I can remember of him talk with him back in the early 80s, and you know, I was a young kid then. But you know that, you know, we remember those type of things, and at least, you know, I mean, so I do. I remember that, you know, and the fear of that situation. So he was around even then. So here he is lasting into this other one as well. So you're right. He's been instrumental, involved in the responses and you know, this thing. Okay. So fascinating. Okay.
And even the creation of all of these things throughout his history of working with the health organization, you know, so just so interesting about all those numbers. And also there's an element of Gemini, also now ruling during the pandemic. So that's interesting too, because Gemini rules air, right? And this was something that was transmitted through the air and through breath, and it also rules the lungs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Right. So.
And also when I think Gemini, I think media. Right.
Yes.
And I think of how, you know, this virus is also spread through the media.
Yes.
as well. I mean, you know, death counters at the bottom here, those type of things to create this very chaotic energy surrounding it. I think definitely that speaks to that. That's definitely a Gemini. And again, Gemini quickness, boom, back and forth, and
the twins,
right? Oh my goodness. The polarity. Yeah, there was a ton of that going on, right? You can see that. Like one of the ones that just occurred to me, they're not actually twins, but they're actually political opposites. You have Gavin Newsom, California. You have Ron DeSantis here in Florida, right? Those two polar opposites in terms of how the response was and the conflict there. Those two states were constantly, you know, still in a theme, right? Can obviously be seen. So that's interesting, that whole Gemini. But I think that a lot of the media, and the way the media fed this frenzy.
Totally.
This chaos. Yeah. It was, you know, it was like, you know, blood in the water, and the medias couldn't, you know, they fell over themselves. They pulled out all the stops. The social media, you know, that aspect, you know, how social media was being weaponized.
And so much
censorship, all of those type of things. Yeah, we'll be speaking to that here as well. So Jupiter, right? So Jupiter's debilitated. The other big planet player, of course, we talk about Saturn, right? Restrictions, pestilence, disease, obstacles, limitations, difficulties, all those things, right? Delays, pressures. And then the final player in this really is Pluto. right?
Right.
And I really, as I said, I come to really get to understand Pluto from the Western perspective. Pluto was a Roman god of the underworld. He ruled the underworld. So again, modern Western astrology would give to him would be pestilence and disease.
Right.
And sure enough, it very much connects to that. Pluto has this manipulative power dynamics, this intensity to it.
Yeah.
Death, rebirth, right? These types of transformations to very difficult, potentially dangerous situations, which is very much obviously what's going on COVID. Now, interesting thing I found really about Pluto that I found really fascinating as well is that Pluto reveals things, hidden things, right? And so it has a very scorpionic energy. People have very strong Saturn planets. I have my moon in Saturn. Your ascendant is in Saturn, right? Yeah. And so the 8th house, which is the natural zodiac ruled by Scorpio, if you will, deals with metaphysics, right? Hidden things and how we delve into mysteries, right? And so people like us, we end up finding the truth, right? Like we are great detectives, right? Totally. And so Pluto, really will reveal the hidden dark things, the unconscious things, right? And I didn't really see people really talking about that in the astrological community as a whole, right? They definitely hit on the theme of Pluto being dark and themes of death and pestilence without doubt. But we are now finding out, and really, to be quite honest with you, even in the heights of it, there were the majority. There was a segment of the population like us saying, "Hey, things are not all as they seem to be here. There seems to be manipulation going on, so on and so forth." I mean, there was all of this happening, and now as we've kind of moved away, we've kind of have some distance from those acute days, if you will. We are actually seeing, oh my goodness, there actually had been manipulation of figures. There actually had been lies, distortions, right? And that was being suppressed. And one of the big things that occurred, as a result of us knowing this, is the whole Twitter files, right? When Elon Musk bought Twitter, he found and had access to all these archives, right, of the suppression that was being done of actual legitimate dissent. Right? And all that is coming out now, right? Yeah. So we're starting to see that flip side of that Pluto was very much involved, right? And in the name of fighting, quote unquote, vaccine hesitancy, for those of us who didn't want to get the vaccine, which was me, I will admit that, right? I'm just, let's be honest here. The biases, so people make their own minds. Right. That's what was needed. We needed more information, not less. Right. Yeah. And we're all adults here. We can decipher which is good information, which is not. Like that's, don't treat me like a child, if you will. Right. And so the manipulation of Pluto is being seen by that Pluto theme of suppressing legitimate dissent from actual scientists, across the board, labeling them as conspiracy theorists, to demean them, to smear them. Right. All this was Pluto. All of that was Pluto. And that was the other planet that was involved here. So we're going to be looking at Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto, because there was a lot of conjunctions between the two, right? Between all three of them. And at significant segments when that occurred, we had some big events happen. All right.
So no doubt that those were the three big players, especially with Jupiter debilitated.
Correct.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. It was just, wow. And then, of course, the two signs that all this was being played out in, right? Which is the field where they're doing battle, if you will, right? The sign of Capricorn and the sign of Aquarius. So Capricorn is government, right? It is an establishment, right? And so we started this pandemic basically January 12th, right, was the first reported death in Wuhan. This was the first reported case in China that really started setting the stage. We had been hearing things, up to it, but January 12th was actually when we had the first reported case. Okay. Interestingly enough, January 12th, 2020 was when Saturn and Pluto were conjunct, right? Wow. So in Capricorn. Okay. So what is that telling us? Well, both planets of pestilence and disease, right, are conjunct each other. So something started then, right? And
there was a spark.
There was a spark, right? And boom, let's go, right? This is when things began. And then you started hearing the rumors and all this other things were going on. So that was the first one. So basically, Saturn Pluto conjunctions, something new those planets are doing with each other. And as they move from each other and start doing squares, trines, oppositions, something related to COVID will be coming out, right? And so this is a long haul cycle, basically. It's a long haul cycle.
Right.
So that was the first one. So pestilence, disease affecting the on the world stage. If I look correctly here, I want to say this happened, let's see, at 20. Okay, yeah, this was, here's the other thing, significant.
Yeah.
This occurred at 22 degrees of a cardinal sign. Remember what we talked about before?
Yes.
This, for those who don't know, is a world point. Okay, so what's the significance of world point? Really fascinating. World points are themes that affect the world stage, right? They're critical degrees that if you have them in your chart, interesting, it's one of the ones that we look at for fame for someone, right?
Yes.
So let's say someone has their ascendant in 22 degrees of Leo, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be that Leo person, right, on the world stage, right? And so that's how you look at that. So these occur just for your own information purposes, in cardinal signs, which would be your Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn.
Yeah.
0 degrees, and also at 22 degrees, right? So there's 2 degrees points for those cardinal signs. The next world point is 15 degrees of fixed signs, right? So that would be your Taurus, your Leos, Scorpio, and Aquarius. Okay, and then your dual signs, it's 7.5 degrees for your dual signs, your Mercury and Jupiter ruled signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sag, and Pisces. Okay, so any significant conjunctions that occur there, when a planet does, something big is happening in the world already, right? So when Saturn and Pluto were conjunct, they were conjunct at 22 degrees 46 minutes of Capricorn, and so already that bam.
Right, and in Capricorn.
In Capricorn governments, right? And then therefore we're knowing that the government is going to respond in a very restrictive way. Saturn is there, right? That represents that. But the other part that really for me was telling as well is Jupiter is debilitated. Jupiter is at that point was 21 degrees. Right, almost at 22 degrees.
Okay.
Right, so basically, all these planets are pretty much. And interesting enough, I'm looking at as we look at it now. See, Saturn. Yeah, the Sun was there. Jupiter was there, debilitated. The Sun was at 21 degrees. Oh, sorry, it was the Sun that was at 21 degrees.
Yeah.
Almost at 22 degrees. So you have the Sun is another indicator of government.
Okay. Yeah.
The Sun in Capricorn is in its a sign it doesn't like. Saturn, the Sun does not like Saturn's sign because Sun wants to be brilliant and shine and expose. I'm out
not
here,
restricted,
not restricted, and here it's in this restrictive sign. So the Sun doesn't do well. So already we speak to the ineffective, how the governments were feeling, unsure what they were going to do, how they were going to do things.
Right.
That's very much what the Sun represents. The Jupiter represents that we knew that there was not going to be truth to this situation. Right. And that's what I don't see really people speaking to.
Sure.
That all this was occurring when this moment was born. Jupiter was debilitated. So we know we're not going to get the truth. Right. It's not a time of dharma. Right. It's a time of adharma, lack of that. Very much so. So there was a need to be cautious. And those of us who are, again, naturally skeptical, we were wondering like, okay, this is different. All the rules were broken, by the way, with this disease. All of a sudden, things like natural immunity, which literally up until that happened, we believed in. We believed that if you got exposed,
right,
you had natural immunity, which was superior to anything that could happen.
Right.
In fact, that's what you wanted, right?
Yeah.
Because if that was not the case, guess what would have happened? Human existence would not exist. We would have died off the first time we got a disease,
right,
and wiped out, right? Because it wasn't as good. So again, we got to see a lot of that, right? We got to see a lot of powers that be were pushing propaganda.
Right.
Instead of actual science, even though contrary, we kept being told what?
Right.
Trust the signs. So.
And crazy with that 22 energy is that, I just went over and all those different players in Wuhan also added up to a 22.
There we go. See, this is what happened when we started doing this. You start to see the synergies of that.
It's so cool.
It's really cool. It's great. So that was the beginning part of that. So, not to mention there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 planets in Capricorn, right? It wasn't just Jupiter and, it wasn't just Saturn and Pluto that was conjunct, right? Yeah. There were other planets there. Those just happen to be the tightest conjunctions. The sun is actually right there as well. But 6, what did I say? 5 planets? 6 planets. 6 planets.
Yeah.
Right? 6 of the 9, 10, depends on how you count them. But 6 of those planets were all together. Something significant was going to happen.
Sure.
And just as an aside, we constantly hear about, there's this configuration in the sky and it's going to do this. It's, we always hear about those things. That doesn't always happen. The fact that all planets are in one sign doesn't necessarily spark something off, right? It's the specific degrees that they're at, in this case, a world point, and the natures of those planets, right? Okay, in this case, yes, something lid got blown off here, right? Something literally got lit.
Right.
So that's always been a bit pet peeve of mine where people are like, oh my goodness, there's this configuration. It's a ho-hum day, right? Yeah. Those type of things. So it's important to really be specific in astrology. And this is how we know, just how we can look at things very distinctly and get granular with it. So we started with that one.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was in January, right? Mm-hmm. And so the ensuing months, right?
Right.
I know down here, people were talking about, they were like, going to Costco and stocking up, it was kind of like an extended vacation, hurricane preparedness, right?
Right. Yes.
Right. So everyone's getting their water. In this case, it was toilet paper. Although to be quite honest with you, I almost want to, I did not do a deep dive to find out why it was toilet paper that people were absolutely, or paper products.
Yeah.
Right. That was so
interesting.
That was so interesting. I don't know. I did, it doesn't make much sense to me there. But I'm sure there is, right? I'm sure, now that it's on my brain, it'll like pop up like, oh, okay, this represents paper or that kind of thing. So we were wondering what was going to, this is kind of the uncertainty of it all, again, initiated by that Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So this pestilence is out there. We're talking about it. Cruise ships are being detained, like, all this stuff, and the government, acting. The next significant event that occurs is March 22nd. Right, here we go again with the 22s, right? That's interesting. Now I'm going to be thinking that every time you say that. March 22nd, we have Saturn enter into Aquarius. Okay. And so now we enter Aquarius. Let's bring what Aquarius represents. Mm-hmm. Aquarius is a sign of humanity. It is the collective, right? It's typically seen, stereotypically as the rebel, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes the rebel without a cause, right? Fighting for the underdog, the unwashed masses, right? Yeah. The little people, right? And people who have been dispossessed, downtrodden, and then fighting for that, right? In traditional astrology, it's actually ruled by Saturn. Okay. And so I'm going to go with that because that's what I practice. I don't even remember what it is in Vedic, in modern astrology. I'm not sure if it's Pluto or Neptune. No, it's not Neptune. I think it might be Pluto. No, Pluto is Scorpio. They give to Scorpio.
Right.
I think that Uranus they give to Aquarius. Okay. Yeah, sudden things. But we're going to go with Saturn. So so Saturn is moving into its own sign. So Aquarius is a sign of the masses, meaning people who have been downtrodden, striving for their rights, right? So you find a lot of people who have this are, they work for charitable organizations, the dispossessed, they're kind of working for those people to help uplift them.
Right.
And struggle for them. And that's that Saturn energy of struggle for that, right? So the collective. And one of the main themes of Aquarius that really got expressed, and you could totally see it with the COVID, was do it for the community, right? Don't think about yourself, do it for the whole.
Right.
And to be honest with you, I think that was weaponized very effectively, I might add, to the other side, right? They've weaponized that even though for me, and we talked before, some of that didn't make sense. It was just the wording of it, right?
Sure.
And people felt good about that. Oh, I'm doing something good for the collective. But were those actually effective, right?
Right.
We're coming on the downside of that mountain and realizing, oh, the masks weren't really as effective as we were. In fact, they weren't effective at all, right? So all these things, but the narrative that took hold was do it for grandma, do it for the collective, right? Think of others, which is a very Aquarian theme. But again, that was misappropriated. Totally. As far as I'm concerned, that's my opinion. It was very much manipulated. Again, Pluto theme, right? That Pluto theme. Now, Saturn moves into Aquarius at 0 degrees. Right around that same time is when we literally had the lockdown of humanity, right? Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what it is. Saturn representing lockdowns. Restrictions. That's when they took hold, right? Right around that time. California actually was on the 19th of March, right? So about 3 days before, and all that time period. That same time period was when we were really talking about that 15 days to stop the spread. Trump signing into legislation, declaring emergencies, and getting the economic fiscal policy, the fiscal stimulus to kind of help people get through all this. Like all that was being talked about around this time. Right. So kind of the promise of what the government was going to do in Capricorn, they start actually doing it, happening here. Not more than 2 weeks later, you then have Jupiter-Pluto conjunction on the 4th of April. Yeah. Okay. And that's actually interesting enough. 2 days before that happened, Governor DeSantis here was one of the last states, if you will, one of the last states to lock down. Right. Because we wanted to go a different way here in Florida, but he felt pressured and so he caved into that. Right. So by that time it happened. So this Jupiter-Pluto conjunction again occurred in in Capricorn. Okay. This is debilitated, Jupiter, right? In a sense, being overpowered by that Pluto. So we very much seeing the theme that was to be of just manipulation, power dynamics, oppression, right? But at the same time, it promised that there will be a revealing truth, if you will. So it was almost like the death of truth, right? If you will, done by the government because it's in Capricorn and by our foundational institutes, right? Interesting enough, it just occurred to me as I'm speaking now, very prominent scientists, Jupiter, right, at higher institutions, Jupiter, were being suppressed, right? And other voices were being amplified, right? So, I mean, did you see that with your numbers or is that kind of similar to?
So, no, I look more at the year numbers.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Let's see what that is.
Get into that? Yeah. Okay. So collectively, 2020, that was a 4 year for everyone, for the world.
That makes sense.
So a 4 we kind of briefly talked about earlier. A 4 is again also ruled by Saturn, right? So it's the number of restrictions, of limitations, also of putting in a lot of hard work and effort. Okay. And then 2021, just looking ahead, was 5. 5's all about change. It's all about transformation and more freedom coming up.
Which is interesting because that's actually what happened. 2020, we were a little more free.
Totally. Right. Okay. Yeah. And then 2022 for the collective was a 6. So then that's a year to get balanced after all the craziness. Okay. So, but then going to the U.S., let's look at the U.S. specifically. So the U.S. in 2020 was a 6. Okay, so a 6 is, yes, it can talk about balance, but it can also talk about the home really being in focus, right? Spending a lot of time at home changes, dealing a lot with the family and working on nurturing each other in community. Okay. And then 2021 for the US was a 7. So this is a very feminine year, a time of more solitude, doing a lot of reflection, really working on growing our faith and spirituality, which would make sense, right? And then 2022 for the US was an 8. Okay, so that jumps back into a masculine year. Things are starting to get back to normal, right? Really focusing back on the economy, on building the economy, focusing back on money for the collective.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a lot of what's,
Yeah,
especially that 7 where it continued with that theme of domestic home of 2020, and then it moved into that 7, which is, not everybody,
right,
was out there. A lot of people still, stayed home and
totally.
yeah.
And then looking further ahead, we look at 2023 for the US, and it's a 9.
Okay.
So that's this year, and 9 is the end of a 9-year chapter. So this is a big year of endings, major changes, releasing, tying up loose ends, finishing unfinished business to get ready for all the changes and new beginnings next year for the U.S.
Yeah. Which makes a lot of sense. We'll do a political kind of election type stuff coming up, but anytime I see a 1, I always look at new people, new things happening.
Yeah.
I remember I can't remember the last time I looked at that one, but I remember one election cycle, I was looking at the 9, and then the people who were running were like, one of them was a 9 person, very much represented that, and the other one was like a 1. I was like, it's got to be the one that's got to win. And sure enough, that one person won because it represented new things, nothing
totally
old, so that's interesting. So when we get to that, that'll be fun to look at. So continuing on with the theme of Saturn moving into Aquarius, Saturn stays in a sign for 2.5 years. Okay. And Saturn rules Aquarius. So we would have expected Saturn to kind of be more comfortable at home, right? So Saturnian themes are going of planning, hard work, the structure, dependable. Those themes would have been very strongly indicated, and its 2.5-year transit means that by the time it leaves, in fact, as we're recording it left in March of 2023,
right?
And now we're considered completely free of the pandemic, if you will, right? Like we're on the way on the side of it, and that literally corresponds. So here where we're talking about when Saturn moved in, 2.5 in 2020, and now we're at the tail end, right? By Saturn, right, leaving in March of 2023, earlier this month, and now we're looking back, right? We get to have a kind of that retrospective. So what these 2.5 years. So if someone had come to me and say, well, how long is this, these lockdowns going to last? When are we going to kind of somewhat get to normal? I'll say, well, it won't be until Saturn's out of,
which is just crazy. Just the timing.
Just that timing. Just that alone was like, oh, okay. And that's exactly what it was.
Right.
With that. So that's another big theme. So, moving on to that, okay, we had that Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, right? That's actually, the other big time frame that occurred. Okay. The next thing, of course, is when we started, right away. Again, I'm going to put my hat on as a holistic health practitioner. I had told my friends, colleagues, associates from Jump, I said, expect a vaccine to talk about a vaccine, right? And sure enough, that's exactly what the next thing that people were talking about. When are we going to get a vaccine, right? Because they had stoked all that fear and all of that angst. I mean, if we had, and I made this analogy all the time, or comparison, if we had put, even today, the amount of deaths from heart disease and stroke on a ticker every day, and talked about it, you'd actually have more death. There are actually more deaths from that than there was from COVID, right?
Right.
Where we can actually document that, not asymptomatic and all these weasel words to get around to naming something that wasn't there, if you will. All of that would be very different. We'd have just as much fear. Right. If you ran that ticker tape, right? And if you ran COVID numbers next to that, it wouldn't be the same because you would see 10 times the amount of deaths, right? From that than from COVID. But because we did that level of manipulation for people, we got what we got, which was, oh my God, we need a vaccine. And so you saw this being primed for the pump. And someone like myself who's in this world, I was already like, yep, I see what's coming. I see this, where this is moving towards.
Even looking at the influenza flu.
Yes.
They don't talk about how many thousands and thousands and thousands of people that kills every year.
Every year, yeah, correct,
You know?
correct, yeah. And apparently, again, we said this in our community, that apparently the flu took a holiday during the pandemic. Apparently no one had the flu anymore, right? It never existed, or at least for that period of time it didn't exist, which was really kind of curious.
Yeah.
But yes, that's exactly it. You know, how many people, again, if we did the same thing, put those ticker tape under there, absolutely, you would think that something absolutely is happening, where unfortunately every year people do die of flu. This is the seasonality of these diseases.
Right.
It happens in colder weather. We have less vitamin D because of the less sunlight.
Right.
The immune system goes down, and those susceptible populations. And again, the susceptible population for quote unquote COVID was the same ones for flu, because it's a respiratory disease.
Exactly.
It's the same thing that happens every single year, if you will. This was slightly different in the sense that more other vulnerable populations, right, were coming down and suffering from it. And not to mention even the disease treatment protocols. There were very legitimate other treatment protocols that people were trying to get people to do. But again, the official narrative was, no, those people are conspiracy theorists. You're taking horse dewormer, whatever the case may be. But even aside from that, there were actually a lot of doctors that were doing natural alternative approaches that were completely being shut down. Very legitimate scientists, and now they're able to kind of talk to people about what they're doing. Right. But at the height of that, absolutely, we were there was only one narrative allowed to be talked about. Right. It was get your flu, get your booster, get your shot. Right. Get your booster. Get your second booster, third booster. You know where I'm going with this.
Right. Yeah.
So when did all this kind of start happening? Well, this started happening when, as we got closer to, let's see, I've got, so from August 23rd to November 19th, Pluto was retrograde. Right. And so retrograde means that planet. So again, the planet of pestilence and all that. When it's retrograde, it's moving backwards. So we're revisiting these things, right? That's when we started really seeing, these numbers are not making sense and all this other type of thing. But at the same time, we started talking about a vaccine, right? And in that same time period, Russia announced that they were the first nation to say they've officially have their own vaccine, right? We were working on ours, but that was that time period they actually had one, right? And there was a Lancet paper that came out during that time period that spoke to the effectiveness of that vaccine and so on and so forth. So we started to see all that happen. And then as we get closer to December, right, we were coming up to another very important conjunction in all of this, right? And that December 20th of 2020, Jupiter and Saturn were also were conjunct, right? And that conjunction literally tied in when we were releasing the vaccines early on for the population of people, right? And how does that work? Well, first of all, Jupiter's out of debilitation, right? So prosperity, abundance, optimism is starting, and is starting to come back in the world, right? It's conjunct Saturn in its own sign. So that means Saturn is going to be feeling really, functioning better, right? So Saturnian themes that we talked about will be improvement. But just the fact that Jupiter left out debilitation, already right there, right? And also we seem to have a solution, right? And that was the vaccine, right? The proposed solution. And so that was really big in that sense. That's another big part. This, of course, occurred where? In Aquarius, the sign of humanity, right? And so this is where we really started being that push. Take it, do your part for the community, the collective versus the whole. Don't be selfish. All these themes were really being spoken about.
Such guilt.
Such guilt. I mean, it was masterful the way it was done, right? But it corresponded a lot to this theme, right? To that conjunction. Now, the significant part about the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction is the fact that this is the beginning for the next 200 some odd years. All the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions will occur in air signs. And that, so basically we have a shift into air, right? And so air represents a lot of different things. One of them is really media, because we speak through air, right? Communications, electronics, okay? This is technology, right? Technology is going to speed up even more, right? Which is hard to imagine,
it's
but
so hard.
it's hard to imagine how much faster we can get. Now, I am concerned for that, for the simple fact that, human capacity to keep up, right? Really outstrips. And so real human connection, as we saw, that was really highlighted by the pandemic, was really kind of short-circuited, don't you think?
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, it just seemed like, we did Zoom calls, we didn't really connect, right? There was all this fear, Saturn, right? And we didn't want to gather together and all that. So really, this age of air that we'll be moving towards is almost the setup for where we'll be eventually moving towards collectively, because the age of Pisces is at the beginning of Pisces here. Not too long, we'll actually be moving into actual Aquarius, and where we will actually have the age of Aquarius. Some people put it at a couple hundred years. Some people put it a little bit longer, but either way, we're closer to it than not closer to it, right? And I personally think within the next 100 years or so, we'll be in it. So the themes of Aquarius, one of the themes of Aquarius is technology, digital. So now we see people talking about what? AI, artificial intelligence, right? All of that is the theme of Aquarius that the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction really just jumped off with that. So that's going to be really significant to kind of consider what all that represents. But in terms of our COVID narrative, this was when the vaccine came to play. This was the theme of the collective. We have a solution, so they said, right? But also within that was the grassroots movement, right? Small groups of committed peoples who are questioning what was going on, right? And that's exactly what was going on. And so there was this backlash to all that. And that was also predicted by this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, where there was these pockets of people, of truth that was coming out, and truth being revealed. So that's a big one. And then really the other big theme, we're going to get into a little bit more when we do the second part, but the other big thing that is occurring, and literally is occurring as we speak here, Pluto will be moving into Aquarius. And it's going to be moving back and forth. 0 degrees is going to go back to the very late degrees of Capricorn, and it'll move back again. But it will be back and to stay in Aquarius in the fall of 2024. And then it will stay there for 20 years. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, interestingly enough, vaccines, as we know them today, are attributed to Dr. Jenner. And with his science experiments with inoculating against smallpox using the cowpox disease, right, in milkmaids in England. And that experiment was done May 14th of 1796. So simple enough, put that date into, my trusty dandy astrology program, and come to find out that Pluto was in Aquarius when that occurred. And so this whole vaccination, compulsory vaccination, started in England first, right? And then it spread to other countries, mandatory in terms of as an official government policy. Right. And so we're going to be, if this was a person who was born, we would be saying they will be having their Pluto return. And so that's going to be the themes of death, transformation, rising from the ashes, revealing truth. And I really feel that we're going to start revealing truths, not just about this COVID pandemic and with the vaccine and all things like that, but really what I've said, because I've been in this for some time, that it's going to expose what the damage has been done to a lot of people with previous vaccines, the childhood vaccine schedule, all these things that have been suppressed for so long, right, are finally going to come out, right? And so this is kind of what I'm excited about, because when I saw that, I was like, now I'm seeing a theme here. And I'm seeing how things will, Pluto's need to reveal the darkness and the manipulation right?
Yeah.
The death behind the scenes. And these companies do have, blood on their hands, right?
Right.
They absolutely do. And so that's going to be revealed.
Mm-hmm.
So people can expect that over these next 20 years for sure, because
Wow.
Pluto stays in a sign for approximately 20 years. So, but this is the beginning of all that,
Right.
But I think we've had a good start because now there's the backlash to all that.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is nowhere near ended, right?
Right.
People are going to be, there's so many vaccine injured that are now being able to speak up. The disinformation that was trying to counteract them and keep them silent is not working anymore. Because we are in the age of air, we have ways of getting our message out. We have people have, right? So they can't control that. It's just everywhere, right? And so that manipulation is gonna blow up, right? And so no, I'm ready for it. I think it's needed. We've been needing this truth to come out, and and to see the seedy, dirty underbelly, and to clean it all out.
Sure.
To clean it all out. And so that's why I'm excited with the astrology of that hopefully some of you, this is from a different perspective. And you can kind of see I tell people just do their own research to kind of understand what's been happening. It's not as simple as what we've been told.
Right.
And I was shocked that people who used to be skeptical of conventional medicine, big pharma, rolled over. Right. And completely checked out their critical thinking faculties.
Right.
But it also made sense because it was fear.
Right.
It was fear porn, right? I mean, we talk about that, right? It was on a massive level. So don't feel bad that you got caught if you're like regretting some of these decisions, because unfortunately there are health consequences for that, right?
Right.
And so, we'll be finding out themes for that. We'll be finding, but that's changing. That's absolutely changing. And so I'm excited to be part of that because they keep saying the new normal is not, all that. Well, listen, my new normal is not having my body autonomy dictated by big governments, big pharma, right? And the fact that people weren't allowed to work, were being, coerced into all this. Those are all Plutonian themes.
Totally. Yeah.
Power manipulation, mind games, gaslighting.
Yeah.
That's Pluto. If you've been in a relationship with a negative scorpionic person, right? Like that's what happens, right? Those type of themes. Yeah. Yeah. So.
And as an aside, we have a separate Pluto and Aquarius video.
Yes. Yeah. That's going to be coming up. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff coming up with that as well. So.
Yeah.
But I just thought that, this part one, when we kind of look into that, and then part two, we'll kind of delve into some more specific themes, seeing how it played out in different parts of the country, politically, how those dynamics came about. I think there'll be a lot to say about that. But we welcome your comments, and this is a topic that very much people feel very passionate about. And so one side for sure has been suppressed. So we're here to say, listen, get the information out there and speak your truth. You're more than welcome to talk. And that's actually what we need more of. Right. Right. There's the name calling, the smearing, the ad hominem attacks. That doesn't do for anything, right? That's just feeding more into that negativity. And there was already a ton of fear out there. So we don't want that. So by all means, keep it respectable in the comments. But we want to hear from you. We want to hear from you and what you have to say, looking to this from that perspective that we kind of share with you. So,
Did you want to touch on the Spanish flu?
Oh, yes, that's right. Thank you for actually mentioning that. So, historically, that's what we work as astrologers, right? Okay, what had happened before to give us an idea of what happened previously, all that kind of what may occur now. So the really last pandemic that we had was the Spanish flu worldwide, right? Interestingly enough, it also corresponded with World War I. Right? Which again, the astrology is really what speaks to that, right? It's, when you step into astrology land, nothing is haphazard, right? It's not just like, ooh, we just happen to have a pandemic the same year we have a major war. No, there are these themes for that, right? Yeah. And interestingly enough, we have all of the same players, right? Making, their scene, right? Sure. We had Jupiter, we had Pluto, we had Saturn. Now, they were in different signs, they were doing different aspects, but they were still doing very hard aspects, creating turmoil and the difficulties. And the same signs were usually involved as well, right? So that I found fascinating. So 1915, 3 years prior to that, was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Okay, that occurred. That would have occurred in Leo. Okay, so that was a pretty interesting where that happened. So, and if you go back and research the Spanish flu, there was kind of like this talk. Maybe this didn't happen exactly in 1918. It just manifested then.
Right.
So I wouldn't be surprised if Saturn Pluto was actually when there were inklings of that.
Sure.
If you will, right? And then actually in 1918, Jupiter was conjunct Pluto in the sign of Cancer. Okay. So that's interesting because now Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, so it's really strong.
Yeah.
And so that one I would have taken to just. We did have some of the restrictions that we have now, if you will, but there seemed to be a different way that they handled it, right?
Yeah.
Yes, there was a lot of death, and for sure, absolutely, with that as well. But Jupiter was exalted. It's almost interesting. I think people were almost freer to do what they wanted in terms of fighting it. If you will, right? So that was interesting to kind of keep in mind. But yeah, so Jupiter and Pluto were conjunct in Cancer. Also in 1918, Saturn was being in Leo was opposed Uranus that was in Aquarius, right?
Okay.
And so Uranus is a planet of sudden, catastrophic, or just sudden events, change, things that happen quickly, right? Out of nowhere type situations.
Right.
And Saturn opposing that would definitely speak to the planet of disease and pestilence, something out of nowhere quickly, right? In opposition, right? Creating that tension dynamic. And also the 1-7 dynamic, being 7 houses away, conflict, right? That would have also been talked about, the war as well.
Right.
And one of the ways that they now kind of understand that the Spanish flu was spread was because of the soldiers returning from the war, right? But even more so than that, people always want to look at it like, oh my goodness, is diseases being spread? Well, diseases can only be spread to the extent that the host person is strong enough to resist it, right? I like to tell people, even my patients and things, that disease doesn't just jump on you like waiting around the corner. Like that's not how it works.
Right.
We have to be susceptible to it, right? There has to be an environment for that disease, right? And war, destruction, people, cramped up cooped up in the foxholes and the trenches with an inordinate amount of stress going on.
Right.
Their immune system is not functioning.
Right.
You're in close, cramped quarters, right? You're going to cough on each other. It's not necessarily you cough on each other, but it's the fact that your suppressed immune system, whatever that person has, normally you'd be able to fight it off. Normally there'll be sanitary conditions to clean everything. You can't. So you are rife for creating conditions that disease that's already there and not would allow the immune system to not fight that off, if you will. And so I really, for me, looking at it, I attribute it more to that. It's more of the thing than it's spreading. It's because we had poor sanitation, middle of war, lowered immune function, the huge amount of high stress environments, right? You're a month of filth, right? That itself is enough to cause that. And so we had, interestingly enough, you may say, okay, well, we don't seem to have a similar condition here, right? We have clean water, we have, right, all these things. But what did we know about this pandemic that really, early on, again, health practitioners like us who were like, we started noticing that certain populations were more susceptible. Obviously, the elderly, right? Lowered immune function, all those type of things, right? But more important, we started seeing people who had comorbidities, diabetes, obesity, right? Lowered immune function because of lowered vitamin D, right? So we as a population are very much we might as well be living back, on those time periods, right? Because we are very poor nutritionally deficient, right? We are extremely overweight. We have diabetes, right? All of those comorbidities makes you susceptible to any disease, if you will. And that was our environment today that mirrored the environment back then, if you will. We just look like we're well fed, right? Unfortunately, well overfed, right? But nonetheless, if you lifted under the hood, you would see a whole different situation that, oh my goodness, this person is malnourished. This person's lowered immune function. This person has vitamin D status, lowered zinc status, right? All these nutrients that if you have proper levels of, you're fighting off disease, you're not getting things in the first place.
Sure.
And so that was a correspondence to what we have today. That it's not just, oh my God, there's a disease out there jumping on us. No, there has to be a proper environment for it to, have its fun, if you will. And so if you make it inhospitable for disease, but hospitable for health, you will be healthy. And it's really just that simple.
Right.
We got that backwards, and then we pumped up the fear. Right?
Yeah.
And that was a stress component, which what does excess stress do? Lowers your immune function. So
totally.
It's just all tied in together. And if we take the time to kind of piece it out slowly, we can tease it out, because unfortunately we have this whiplash reaction to fear, right? And they were able to do all these things of shutting us down. You weren't able to work. I mean, a lot of harm was done to children because they weren't able to go to school. Anxiety, which was already a problem, right, tipped over to something else. And we will live with the repercussions of these decisions when there were actually countries that did something very different, have better health outcomes. There were states here, i.e. Florida, that did very differently, who are better off now than previous. And the other countries and states still recovering because they gave into that fear. Right. And so there we go.
So interesting that the same players looking at the Spanish flu were the same players now. It's just crazy.
It's astrology, as you know, with like numerology, once you get into it, it just answers questions and gives you enough, more than enough to understand what's happening.
Our minds are always blown continuously.
Even however long we've been doing it, it's always like, well, look at that. Of course. So there we go.
So guys, thanks for tuning in
Thank you.
to the Metaphysical Report. And as Steve said, we would love your comments. We'd love to hear what you think about what we said. If you like the video, please like it. And if you vibe with us, please subscribe to our channel. We're going to be putting out weekly videos. And if you have any suggestions for anything that you'd like to see on the show, we called it the Metaphysical Report. So it's a very large umbrella where we can do many different things. And if you'd like a private reading with Steve or I, all of our information is in the description box below.
Reach out to us. We're excited to be doing this content, and we'll be doing more. And we will see you next time.
Part 1 COVID out.